The Unfinished Business of the 1971 War and Its Impact on Bangladesh Hindus. Written by Rakesh Krishnan Simha. India's victory in the 1971 India-Pakistan War led to the creation of Bangladesh, but it also left deep, unresolved wounds for the new country's Hindu minority. With enduring violence, property dispossession, and political marginalization, the war's aftermath continues to impact the lives of minorities in Bangladesh. The 1971 India-Pakistan War, also known as the Bangladesh Liberation War, was India's first decisive military victory in the past 1,000 years. It resulted in Pakistan's complete surrender, the slicing of Pakistan into two, the halving of its population, and the capture of over 93,000 Pakistan Army soldiers, marking the largest surrender in military history since World War II. But looking beyond what was unquestionably a great victory, the 13-day war remains one of the most significant and traumatic events in the history of the Indian subcontinent. The brutal conflict, which led to the independence of Bangladesh, was the culmination of decades of political and ethnic tensions between Bengali-speaking East Pakistan and Punjabi-dominated West Pakistan. For Bangladesh's Hindu minority, which suffered the most, the aftermath of the war represents an enduring struggle with a deep sense of unfinished business, one that has shaped their social, political, and economic status in the country even to this day. For Hindus, the 1971 war was a reminder that the struggle for civilization is constant. Barely a quarter century after the post-partition riots that claimed the lives of over 1 million Hindus, the Indian Armed Forces once again had to intervene to safeguard a way of life, a culture, and a community that had endured thousands of years of invasions, colonization, and violence. In this sense, the Bangladesh conflict was not just a political or military victory. It was a victory for the survival of Hindu civilization in the Indian subcontinent. Was it a Pyrrhic victory? Yet there is a widespread feeling among many Indians that the 1971 war wasn't a victory at all. They argue that the gains made by the soldiers on the battlefield were surrendered by India's political leadership at the negotiating table. In that sense, the war's outcome was a net loss for Hindus. This is not quite true, for India's resounding victory and the Pakistan Army's spectacular collapse meant that never again would a smaller, yet more belligerent country wage war against a much larger and powerful nation. Pakistan's dream of conquering India via war was permanently dashed. Significantly, India no longer had to maintain a military presence on its eastern borders, giving its military considerable flexibility in its operations against both Pakistan and China. Geopolitically, India became the preeminent power in the subcontinent. At the same time, India's decision not to go for Pakistan's jugular meant the victory remained incomplete. Firstly, India did not pressure Pakistan to resolve the Kashmir border. Both countries had previously fought over this contested region in 1947 to 48 in 1965, but post-war negotiations failed to address the Kashmir issue adequately. Despite holding nearly 100,000 Pakistani soldiers and officers for 18 months in POW camps, with Islamabad frantically begging India to return them home, India did not capitalize on Islamabad's desperation by insisting that Pakistan evacuate occupied Indian territory in Kashmir. Secondly, and more significantly, while India sought to protect the Hindu minority in Bangladesh during the war, after its soldiers withdrew from the newly liberated nation, the Bangladeshi leadership took no steps to safeguard its Hindu and tribal minorities. Forced Islamization, temple destruction, and the looting of Hindu properties continued after a brief respite. Quite simply, East Pakistan's Punjabi Muslim rulers were replaced by Bangladesh's Bengali Muslims. A quick overview of the war. On March 10, 1971, a group of senior military officers assembled for a meeting at the operations room of the Pakistan Army's Eastern Command headquarters at Dhaka. Among them was the head of the Pakistan Army in East Pakistan, modern Bangladesh, Amir Abdullah Khan Niazi. His hatred of Bengalis was so intense that he said, "Main is Haramzadi Kam ki nasal badal, dunga ya muyi ki samajdihain." I will transform the breed of this bastard nation. They should not underestimate me. The Pakistani general meant that the relatively light-skinned Punjabis and Pathans of the Pakistan Army would change the complexion of the darker Bengalis via mass rapes. On the night of March 25th, In an exercise codenamed Operation Searchlight, the Pakistani army began a brutal massacre that lasted 9 long months. Pakistani soldiers not only killed 3 million Bengalis, approximately 70% of whom were Hindus, but also raped as many as 600,000 Bengali women, including the very old and very young. The Pakistani generals fixed rape quotas for their soldiers, and porn movies were shown to stir up these Punjabi and Pathan troops. On August 2, 1971, Time magazine published details of the massacre. The Hindus, who account for 3/4 of the refugees and a majority of the dead, have borne the brunt of the Muslim military's hatred. Even now, Muslim soldiers in East Pakistan will snatch away a man's lungi sarong to see if he is circumcised, obligatory for Muslims. If he is not, it usually means death. Others are simply rounded up and shot, commented one high U.S. official. It is the most incredible, calculated thing since the days of the Nazis in Poland. Genocide researcher Professor R.J. Rummel said, "These willing executioners were fueled by an abiding anti-Bengali racism, especially against the Hindu minority. Bengalis were often compared with monkeys and chicken, and the soldiers were free to kill at will." After months of brutal conflict, Bangladesh achieved independence on December 16, 1971, with the support of India's military intervention. Yet, despite the victory, the war left many unresolved issues for Hindus that continue to shape their lives in post-liberation Bangladesh. A divisive aftermath, the Hindu question. When the new government of Sheikh Mujibur Rahman and the Awami League took charge of Bangladesh, it initially pledged to protect the rights of all citizens, regardless of their religion or ethnicity. However, the experiences of Hindus, who had been disproportionately affected by the violence, were left largely unaddressed in the national discourse. This unresolved and unfinished business has had lasting effects. Perception of allegiance and identity. One of the most complicated aspects of the 1971 war for Hindus was the perception that they were somehow loyal to India and were, therefore, a potential fifth column. Elements within the Pakistani military and their collaborators painted the Hindu community as supporters of Indian interests. This association led to targeted violence, and the scars of that narrative have lingered in the collective memory of Bangladesh's Hindu minority. Even in the decades since the war, there has been a subtle but persistent questioning of the loyalty of Hindus in Bangladesh. This othering of Hindus as potential traitors or foreign sympathizers has led to social marginalization, both in public and in political discourse. Hindus, especially those from rural areas, have often felt that their loyalty to the state is under suspicion, even as they continue contributing to the nation's fabric. Property dispossession and economic displacement. During and after the 1971 war, many Hindu families faced violence that led to the destruction of property, businesses, and livelihoods. Thousands of Hindu households were either forcibly evicted or fled to India, losing their land and wealth in the process. While many Hindus returned after the war, they found their properties occupied by others, and legal frameworks for restitution were weak or non-existent. In the decades since Bangladesh's formation, property recovery has been one of the unresolved grievances for Hindus. Complex bureaucratic hurdles, corruption, or legal technicalities have often thwarted attempts to reclaim lost properties. Plus, economic displacement has meant that many Hindu families remain economically vulnerable, struggling with lower income and fewer opportunities than their Muslim counterparts. Religious persecution and targeted violence. Despite Bangladesh's nominally secular constitution, the Hindu minority has continued to face religious persecution, especially in times of political instability. During periods of civil unrest or when Islamist political parties gain power or influence, Hindu communities become frequent targets of violence. Temples are desecrated, homes are burned, and individuals are assaulted or killed for their religious identity. The scars of 1971 also seem to have paved the way for this vulnerability. While the war itself may have ended, the violence directed at Hindus has continued in various forms, exacerbated by political and sectarian conflicts. The recurrence of attacks on Hindu minorities in Bangladesh often evokes memories of the brutality of the 1971 war, leading many to concur that the ghosts of the past have never truly been laid to rest. Politics of memory and historical amnesia. The experiences of Hindus during the 1971 war have been marginalized in the broader national narrative. Bangladesh's victory over Pakistan is celebrated as a triumph of Bengali nationalism, but the role of Hindus in that struggle, both as victims and as active participants, is often overlooked or downplayed. The war's atrocities against Hindus are not prominently featured in textbooks or official commemorations, leading to a sense of historical amnesia. This gap in the collective memory has made it difficult for the Hindu community to seek justice or recognition for the crimes committed against them. Many Hindus feel that the state does not acknowledge their suffering, and the historical silence surrounding their experiences has hindered healing and reconciliation. Secular apathy. Ironically, the primary reason for this amnesia is India's secular leadership. American diplomat Gary Bass has provided a vivid account of how Indian politicians and diplomats colluded to suppress news of the genocide. He writes in his book The Blood Telegram, Nixon, Kissinger, and a Forgotten Genocide. From Moscow, D.P. Dhar, India's ambassador there, decried the Pakistan Army's pre-planned policy of selecting Hindus for butchery, but fearing inflammatory politicking from right-wing Hindu parties like Jana San, he wrote, "We were doing our best not to allow this aspect of the matter to be publicized in India." The Indian government at the time covered up the genocide of Bengali Hindus in 1971 because it believed secularism would come under threat in India. Swaran Singh, the then External Affairs Minister of India, is said to have told a meeting of Indian diplomats in London, "In India, we have tried to cover that up, but we have no hesitation in stating the figure to foreigners." Singh instructed his staff to distort for their country. "We should avoid making this into an Indo-Pakistan or Hindu-Muslim conflict. We should point out that there are Buddhists and Christians besides the Muslims among the refugees who had felt the brunt of repression." Genocide denial became the unstated policy of the Indian government. Scholar Srinandan Vyas, in his research paper at IIT Kanpur, stated that of the 3 million killed in 1971, 2.5 million were Hindus. Senator Edward Kennedy and Pulitzer winner journalist Sidney Schamberg noted that Hindu houses were marked with a bright yellow H. Says Vyas, nearly 2.5 million Hindus were killed during the 9 months of Pakistani army repression of East Pakistan in 1971. Thus, it was a Hindu slaughter in 1971. The Indian government-controlled secular media deliberately hid the sinister truth of Hindu genocide in East Pakistan. Minority Report. Hindus in Bangladesh are often portrayed as a minority community that is not fully integrated into the national identity. While they continue to make significant contributions to the country's culture, economy, and society, they remain politically marginalized. The political parties in Bangladesh, especially those that appeal to Islamist or conservative constituencies, rarely address the needs or grievances of Hindus, preferring to focus on issues that are seen as more central to the Muslim majority. Hindu representation in government and political positions remains low, and many Hindus find themselves excluded from mainstream political discourse. In a country where political power dynamics are often shaped by religious identity, Hindus are seen as secondary citizens. The recent spate of forced resignation of Hindus from influential jobs in academia and government is a pointer to this effacement of Hindus from the country's national life. Confronting the unfinished business. The unfinished business of the 1971 war will continue to impact Bangladesh's Hindus until the country takes steps toward confronting the lingering injustices of the past. This requires a multi-pronged approach. Acknowledging the suffering. Bangladesh needs a more inclusive national narrative that acknowledges the suffering of Hindus during the war. This means not only recognizing their role in the liberation struggle, but also addressing the violence and displacement they endured. Justice and restitution. Property rights and economic recovery programs for Hindus who lost their land and businesses in the aftermath of the war should be a priority. Legal measures to facilitate the return of lost properties or compensatory measures could help rebuild trust in the state. Protection of religious minorities. Bangladesh must do more to ensure the safety of religious minorities, especially in times of political upheaval. Stronger legal protections, law enforcement, and a political culture that embraces diversity would help mitigate religious violence. Political representation. The Hindu community needs greater political representation to ensure their voices are heard in decision-making processes. Political parties should actively reach out to minority communities, and government policies should prioritize the rights of all citizens, irrespective of religion. Conclusion: the 1971 war is a defining chapter in Bangladesh's history, but for Hindus, it remains a chapter that has yet to be fully written. The unresolved issues of that war continue to shape the lives of Hindus in Bangladesh, affecting their identity, safety, and economic well-being. Until the country addresses these grievances and provides recognition, justice, and protection for its Hindu citizens, the unfinished business of the 1971 war will continue to haunt both the community and the nation at large. The pogroms against Hindus have inflamed Hindus in India, and this time, there are appeals to the government to atone for abandoning Bangladesh Hindus in 1971 by applying multi-pronged pressure on Dhaka. After all, they argue, what's the point of having the world's fourth-largest military if you cannot protect your co-religionists? The Indian government can hold off only for so long. If the pogroms continue, Bangladesh might find itself the target of rebel movements supported by India, if not a direct attack to relieve pressure on the Hindus and other minority groups. This could lead to Bangladesh's breakup, a scenario that could be disastrous for the country as it has very little land and way too many people. Only through open dialogue, a commitment to secular values, and a collective reckoning with the past can Bangladesh move forward in truly healing the wounds left by the fateful conflict that took place more than half a century ago. For India, the obvious message is that the next time it sends in the military and sacrifices the lives of thousands of young men and women, make their sacrifices count by settling the issue conclusively.